Hi, I wanted to talk a bit about prototypes because it's something that is being discussed quite a lot at the moment. I feel like people are talking a lot about prototypes, especially in the context of AI and vibe coding, but in general, there seems to be more focus on this topic. And it's something we care a lot about at Nordcraft. We use it all the time. But we have, I think, a very different approach to prototyping than most people seem to do. So I want to talk a little bit about how we think about prototyping in Nordcraft and how we believe you should think about prototyping when building software. But before we get into that, I want to just take a brief seconds to explain the difference between three terms that often gets thrown in the same bucket, which is a proof of concept, a prototype, and an MVP. So let's start with the proof of concept, because they're often even used interchangeably, but they are actually very different things. And the distinction, in my opinion, is quite important. So let's start with a POC, or proof of concept. And the goal of a proof of concept is to answer usually just a single question: is, could this work? So I want to build a product where an AI sorts out all your finances, right? It sounds like a great idea. I hate doing finances. Maybe it's a good idea. But the real question is the technology actually at a level where that's possible yet? It might be, but we should verify it first. We should validate that it actually could work, right? For Nordcraft, the first probably year I worked on that, it was very much a POC, right? It was, I still didn't know, is all this going to come together in a way where it actually is working? Is it actually going to be a good way, a good experience of building web applications? And for the first year, it was all about figuring out, is this idea even valid? Way more than how it should work, it was, can it? So in this case, I said time to build, because normally in days, if it's really complex, it can be longer, right? So these are relative terms. But usually you can build a proof of concept in a matter of days that verifies that that idea you have can work. If you're doing AI finances, maybe it's going to take a little longer, because there's a lot of edge case you need to work out is even possible, right? But we're saying, answering a single question, could it work? Generally, we're going to say in most cases, time to build is about days. And almost always, you throw this away afterwards. Like, this is not, you're not trying to build a product. You're not trying to build anything feasible. The goal is not to iterate endlessly on this. It is just to verify one point as quickly as possible, right? So throw away software that serves a single purpose. Let's go look at a prototype. So prototypes are not the same. Prototypes try to answer the question, how should it work? It is all about discovering the UX. It's all about discovering the interaction, what kind of features should work and how should they work, right? And the whole goal of prototypes is to learn something in every iteration. And of course, this comes from product design, in sort of physical product design, where every prototype would be thrown away. And people would start by building like a prototype out of clay, or I think now mostly it's 3D printing, right? And then step up to building more and more sophisticated prototype, verifying new ideas along the way. And time to build here, at least in software world, is usually in the terms of weeks, right? The one thing that's really important here is that it's not a single question. So prototypes require iteration. Like, you build a version and then you build a new version, right? So in traditional manufacturing, you would build new prototypes. But in software, we don't need to do that, because we can just make a new copy and then iterate, right? So in software, we iterate over the same product and evolve it, right? So with prototypes, you generally want them to be in a sensible tech solution, because you need to get a lot of details right. You want something that's quite close to, or as much as possible identical to what you want the final user experience to be, right? But you're developing this in iterations, right? And the final term here is the MVP, the minimum viable product, right? The goal of a minimum viable product is to answer a different question. It's not how should it work. It's, do people actually want to buy it, right? You've found out your product. You know you're solving the right problem. You have a good idea of how you want to solve it. Now you need to figure out, is this actually something that connects with people? And it might be that you are onto the wrong idea, of course, and that this is unfortunately when you figure out it's not going to work. But it might also very likely be that you figure out there's things that needs improving. So you'll still iterate on this, but the MVP is sort of a point where you're saying, I can actually sell this now. It's a sellable product. And time to build here are in months, right? You generally don't build a sellable product in days. And you usually don't build it in weeks if it has any sophistication to it. Or at least if you're probably cutting a lot of corners maybe you shouldn't, right? So having this distinction quite important. Like they are not the same thing. We should be careful not to use them interchangeable because it will cause some confusion, right? But what I want to focus here on is this prototype. Because I think a lot of times people see this as a standalone project that you build, then you figure out a bunch of stuff, and then you'll go and build it for real after, right? And I would argue that's not a very good way of thinking about prototypes in software development. It makes total sense if you're building like hardware or anything like that. You're going to need to build a lot of versions until you get it right. And every time you build a new, you kind of do have to start over. That's just the nature of physical production, right? But in software, we don't need to think like that. We can iterate on the same piece of software forever and keep improving it. So there's really no reason to throw things away. It'll just slow us down. And the other thing about prototypes is that process, at least in our world, never stops. So we might have built an early prototype of Nordcraft years ago to figure out how it should work. But we use the same process for every time we introduce a new feature to Nordcraft. We build it quickly. We don't spend a ton of time up front discussing all the details of how something should work. What we've discovered a lot of times is that you can plan up to a point, and you should plan up to a point, but you also have to accept that you learn through the process of development. And as a result, no plan ever actually works out the way you intended, right? Some of the things do, but a lot of the things you figure out, like once you try it, it didn't quite have the right feeling. It wasn't as intuitive as it was in your head, etc. Once you put it in front of someone who wasn't in your head when you decided how this thing should work, you realize that actually it makes a lot less sense to other people. You need to tweak it, right? And that's why we do prototyping, because even the best plan has flaws, right? Now, I want to show you some examples of prototyping we're doing in Nordcraft right now. So I have a project here. And we have this feature in Nordcraft where if you go to this URL, you will actually find our feature flags page. So these are features that are currently in development that are not released to everyone yet. But if you want to look and follow along in our work, you can actually have a look and see how this works, right? I will not recommend you do this while working on production software, because the point here is in development. That's why we tried to design this page. You go over here, Casper on the left side, swearing at you, right? The whole point of this page, this design, is to tell you that these are experimental and you use them at your own risk, right? But we use this a lot internally as a way of being able to use features that are still in development and have that constant feedback from the whole team, a lot of times from our community as well, as we're developing, so we know how to improve every part of that feature and get it just right. So one example of this is that we are revamping our version control system. Not the way it works, but the UI for it, right? So right here, I have a very simple example page with a button, and I've actually made some changes. I'm on a branch here called Start, and I've made some changes on this branch. And we now have a completely new way we visualize that, so you can see exactly what actually changed. Well, actually the style background was changed on this main here, and on the button we can see we added a click event here. So I get a much better visualization of what actually changed. It's not done yet, because there's a lot of edge cases we discovered in this process. So like, well, some things are easy to visualize, some things are a little bit more difficult. We couldn't have planned this ahead of time, because it's only once we get into it and try it out and test it and see all the different edge cases, we realize what the full scope of this task is and how everything should handle. But by prototyping it, we get so much information as soon as possible, right? Now, we're building this in Nordcraft. The same tech stack we would not be built for the full feature, because we are building the full feature. But every iteration is a prototype. Every iteration is something that we can get feedback on. Right? So in short, our approach to prototyping is that everything we build starts with prototyping. And we start very early and we get it out very quickly. And not all features are as polished as this, right? Another one we're working on is that we're adding a brand new GraphQL sort of editor that actually lets you go and build up GraphQL queries visually, right? And again, it's not out yet. It's not finished. We're working out a lot of the details, and being able to experiment and test it at every single iteration means that we get the sort of real feel for how this works, right? It's not just what it looks like. It's not just does it solve a problem. It is what is the experience as a user for using it, right? And that is not something you can plan around a whiteboard. Right? And maybe a last example, I think is quite a good one here, is that we're adding these custom style. We change the way we work with CSS variables. This is probably the least developed of these, and you can see it says things like untitled when you open it up. A lot of the UX is very clunky here, right? Because it's very unfinished. But the goal here is to verify that I can do I can create these style variables with what's called in CSS a syntax, which actually means I can now use them inside things like, I can now use them in here, right? And I can actually like change the value of the variable and apply different patterns. And this has a whole bunch of nice features and CSS. This means you can now start animating things like gradients, which you normally couldn't. It means we can expose these in components. All sorts of things we can get around with having this feature. It's going to open a lot of doors, especially around animation and especially around how you organize your project in terms of styling. But as I say, it's a feature that changed a lot of things, had a lot of impact, and getting it just right is really, really important. It's the difference between the people actually going to use it or they're going to slightly overlook it. Right? So that's kind of our thinking around prototyping. It's getting out of this idea that it's a standalone application, that you're prototyping a product, and actually saying, well, since we work in software where branching is so cheap and so easy, you can so easily create a new throwaway copy of your production software and test it out and verify. And you can even like feature flag things and work on them for a long time without exposing them to all users. There's so many tools we have in our toolbox as software developers that we get to work in a way that people working in like hardware production could only dream of, right? So I would highly recommend experimenting that at your team. Go and try it out. Go and talk to your team about this approach of saying, can we do more rapid prototyping as part of our product? Not as a whole standalone step. Because if prototyping becomes its own process, separate from software development, something you have to do before, it starts slowing down your whole process. And now you end up having to do even more planning and even more accounting for all this time spent. But if you build it into your normal daily routine, normal part of your development process, you get all those benefits of actually learning as you build without all the hassle of creating a ton of extra throwaway projects all the time. Thank you very much for listening. I hope this makes sense. Go and try Nordcraft if you're curious. It's fantastic for this kind of work, especially because both designers and developers can prototype on their own things and what they're working on without needing to build the whole thing fully at a time. They can iterate, they can get all the feedback, they can get either the design or the functionality just right before they start introducing the rest of the team to the project. Right? So yeah, go give that a try. Make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel if you want to see more of our videos. Thank you very much.